Okay, so today I wanted to look at the legal position of the Russian war in Ukraine. What we've got to remember before we go into the legalities is we've got this process of globalisation, which is basically the whole world is integrating into one system, one community. Economically, politically, socially, culturally, all the barriers are coming down. We're becoming more interconnected and interdependent. Now, the big problem is which values prevail in this globalized world. We become one kind of system, economic, political. You've got the competing values. There is a lot of competition at the moment. You've got, for example, independence. Some countries specifically believe a nation state should be sovereign and independent, like with Brexit, like Americans, the Anglo-Saxons generally believe in this independence. Or interdependence. Independence is kind of anti-global anyway. Interdependence, the European Union values believe in this. They believe in solidarity, in creating one juridical system and one community, and being able to share resources and like I can go to France if I want and retire or open a business or get a job or stand for election, whatever. So we become interdependent. My interests become your interests because we are part of the same animal, if you like. Whereas interdependence, we've got a bit more of a zero-sum game because we're competing. UK want the resources, they want all the businesses to go to the UK and come out of Europe and move. So they're kind of competing. There's two communities in competition. Whereas dependence, now this is what the Russians are looking for. They really want this kind of sadomasochistic dependency where satellite states really depend on what the will of Russia is for their survival, so for their well-being, shall I say. So they want to create this these states that are weaker, which are dependent on Russia, and so comply as subordinates to Russia's wishes. And obviously Russia is dependent on those satellite states for its well-being. So we've got these competing values. So the Boris Johnson and the European Union don't necessarily stand in the same camp, although they're both very against dependency, this subordination of weaker states, and so are on the same side at the moment. Now, just to say a little bit about interdependence. Interdependence should create a more peaceful world. Okay, so we are one community. Our interests are your interests. If I do you good, I'm doing myself good. If we help Italy by investing in Italy and buying Italian, that money will circulate. So Italy will produce more and then buy more from Germany. So we're all in the one system, shall we say, without the barriers. And so acting together is important in that situation. Right, just going now to international law. So we have had lots of opinions. I expect everyone's seen the different opinions. There's some opinions that the Russians are trying to protect themselves against NATO, or maybe Ukraine is a bit Nazified, or Ukraine isn't a real state, it's a kind of, artificial state because of the Soviet Union, etc. All these opinions are just opinions, and there's lots of opposite opinions. In the world, you've got lots of diversity, and you're going to have lots and lots of philosophies and opinions, and they count before the law is established. But once the law is established, they don't count. Only the law counts. Only the law dictates what is legitimate and what is illegitimate. Morality doesn't dictate that. What is right or wrong is dictated by the law, and if we do think the law is wrong, then we need to change the law democratically, and so everybody agree. And that is in international law. All the international law is done with the consent of those states involved in that specific law, and not against anyone's wishes, but they are binding. And if a state doesn't agree with it, then it needs to try to change that law with the agreement of others, not unilaterally, because they've already agreed it, but try to get the cooperation and collaboration of other states to change that law. And international law does dictate that Ukraine is a nation state. That's the first thing to clear up. So it is a member of the United Nations, so it can only be a nation state with sovereignty. When you have membership of the United Nations, you've got obligations and duty and rights, and one of the rights are those rights awarded to a nation state. And so Ukraine, in international law, accepted by Russia too, is a nation state. Now, as a nation state, like I said, it's got obligations and rights. And one of the obligations we can see in Article 2(4) of the United Nations Charter. This charter is signed by all the members, so it's considered international law. And it says, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. So that's very clear. You cannot use force or threaten force against another state. I have heard arguments that America went into Iraq, so they did it, so we can do it. You can't, with the laws, you can't say they broke the law, so I can break the law too. The legal position is Russia is in the wrong, according to this article, and that's there's no way out of that. This article, the whole charter was written after the Second World War to settle. It was the settlement of the Second World War to try to create a peaceful world and an international system with international agreed codes of behaviour. And this article particularly is fundamental. It's one of the fundamental principles of the United Nations that a nation state has self-determination. They cannot be forced to do anything they don't want to. If they sign a treaty, that's a different thing. They're not being forced. If they've agreed that Russia takes Donbass region or something and it's in a treaty, that's suddenly the international law changes. They've established that is Russia, but they haven't done that, and it's fundamental this principle is respected. It's so fundamental, really, this specific article, or comma even, because it would create such a different world if we didn't respect this. At the moment, to progress, to develop, etc., a nation state needs to compete. It needs to produce what other nation states want and try to sell and offer, try to be constructive part of the world community. If instead, a nation state needs just to have enough arms and guns and then just take whatever other nation state, if that's the principle, suddenly developing and progressing would not be done in a way that it's done right now. It would really be a race to who's strongest. So it is quite a dangerous principle to establish in an international system. And another article which is very important in this situation is Article 51 of the UN Charter, and it says nothing in the present Charter shall impair the inherent right of individual collective self-defence if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. I'll stop there because just to emphasize, Ukraine, Russia has the obligation not to force Ukraine to do anything it doesn't want to do or invade it, but Ukraine has also the right to defend itself until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace. And we'll look at that a little bit as well. But up to now, there's been no measures taken by the Security Council, so Ukraine can defend itself according to international law. That's what's established in this charter. And as for supplying weapons to Ukraine, weapons can be sold or given to all sorts of countries Italy wants to distribute. So Italy does trade in weapons, and it trades with many countries in weapons, and Ukraine is one of them, and it's legitimate. It's legitimate to give or trade for weapons. The only weapons that are restricted are weapons specified by different treaties. Maybe certain weapons are very indiscriminate, or maybe cluster bombs, for example, last a long time after the war and have horrific injuries on citizens, and so they're banned. Or there's a treaty for the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, so you can't trade in those weapons. But there's absolutely no legal obstacle to Italy sending, or any country that wants to send or sell weapons to Ukraine. Ukraine is an independent state, free to buy weapons or accept weapons from wherever. So that's the legal position. As the Constitution of Italy sometimes is quoted, l'Italia repudia la guerra. So it says, Italy repudiates war, but then it says come strumento di difesa alla libertà degli altri popoli. This means that they repudiate war as a means, as an instrument to offend the liberty, to restrict the liberty of other peoples, so other nation states. And that is exactly what Russia's doing, not Ukraine. Russia's trying to restrict the liberty of the freedom of Ukrainians, the Ukrainian state. And this is what Article 11 repudiates. It doesn't repudiate the self-defense. In fact, in Article 52, it says, la difesa della patria è sacro dovere del cittadino. So, self-defense of the homeland is a sacred duty of the citizen. Obviously, it's talking about Italy, but the same principle can be applied to Ukraine. So I think the founding fathers would see as honourable the fact that the Ukrainians are defending their home country, their fatherland, with as much as possible. It says it's a sacred duty. Um, it's something higher than ourselves. Okay, so it's something we sacrifice ourselves for. A duty we sacrifice ourselves for the country. So it's not just a duty, but something much higher than our individual selves. So it takes sacrifice. It takes sacrifice. Now, what is the normal procedure for an aggressive war against a UN member state? So normally the UN member state that's been aggressed will be protected or can be protected, and this has happened in the past when Iraq was invaded the first time. The first time it was not Iraq, Kuwait was invaded by Iraq. The UN authorized, it was the Security Council of the UN, authorized that the world eject Iraq from Kuwait. And that's what the world did. So it can actually authorize a war to preserve the peace and to bring the world back to stability. The big problem, we can't use this normal procedure because Russia is a permanent member and would obviously use the veto. Any permanent member that doesn't agree with a resolution can veto it, and obviously that would happen in this specific case. So the UN is a bit cornered. It's a bit impotent. It can't do what it should do really, or what its purpose is. Its purpose here, it says its purpose is to maintain international peace and security, and to that end to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. So actually the UN should have a role in this specific case, but it can't because Russia is a permanent member.